Horror is a genre that has fascinated humanity for as long as stories have been told. From ghost stories around a campfire to gruesome displays on the silver screen, we all love a good scare. It gets the adrenaline pumping, the blood flowing, and the chills rolling down our spines. When it comes to immersing yourself in horror, one of the best mediums is the video game. Rather than being a passive observer to somebody else's torment, you are the one living it. For some, this is off-putting, but for others, this is their biggest draw. But while horror may be a fascinating genre to consume, it can be even more fun to be the one causing the horror. Behind every horrifying game, behind every jump-scare-laden movie, and behind every bone-chilling tale, there is a creator. Somebody who took it upon themselves to bring those nightmares to life, and who delights in causing terror in the audience. Take the horror community on YouTube, a collection of twisted individuals who have decided to use their voices to chill you to your very core, who trawl through the nightmarish realms of horror literature and true scary stories to entertain, delight, and terrify. But these talented peddlers of panic are themselves only human. Well, mostly. So they must have something that terrifies them, right? But what is it? Welcome to the Scare Lab, where in today's experiment we hear from some of YouTube's creepiest creators as they dive into their memories to answer one important question. What games scare the scarers?
Hey everyone, it's Miss Creepy Tales here. As we all know, there is an abundance when it comes to the games that people can play on their devices. And though I'm the type that doesn't game that much, there are a few that I've tried and I really enjoyed. But out of all the genres out there, horror games enticed me. And by far, the one that scares me the most, but is also my favorite, would be Phasmophobia. What's that game, you might ask? Well, Phasmophobia is a 4-player online game where you and your team members operate as paranormal investigators. So, you're given the option to choose a haunted location that you would want to work on. It could be a normal house, a prison, an asylum, a farmhouse, and many more. You can also choose how hard each location would be. After doing that, all you have to do is accomplish the objectives given and identify what type of ghost you're dealing with. You can do this by using the different ghost hunting equipment given. And by the way, those are so cool. You also earn money in the game when you achieve the goals and when you pinpoint the right ghost. You can use this money to purchase more equipment that would aid you with your future task. So, why does this game scare me? First, it's the ambience that it sets the moment you set foot inside the location you choose. Sometimes, people get scared because of the background music because that makes things creepier. But this game doesn't have that. Instead, it gives you this subtle background noise that makes me feel claustrophobic because it makes the room seem like it's getting smaller and smaller while you venture through the location. This, accompanied by the lack of light, makes me feel like I can't breathe. Yes, you can have a flashlight, and yes, you can turn the lights in a room or a place, but it's just never enough. Plus, the lights turn off at times, or flickers. Second is the fact that your character moves slowly. Yes, even if you run, it still seems so slow, and the thought that I'm unable to escape swiftly from the ghost that's haunting me, just because my limbs can't move as fast as I want them to, scares me. Third one would be the whispers. Personally, even without the game, I do fear the idea of someone whispering or getting too close to me. So there are parts of the game where the ghost whispers something to you, and it makes me feel that I can feel the breath of the ghost at the back of my neck. I've experienced this multiple times in the game, but it still makes my hair stand on end. The combination of the effects and the events that happened build up in me during the game, and no matter how much I prepare myself, when the ghost starts hunting, my heart drops to my stomach and I panic. I forget what buttons to press and what to do, and I just stay there frozen and ultimately end up dying. The fact that I lose all logic and end up panicking no matter how much I prepare scares me the most. But don't worry, I'll continue playing this game despite the terror, because I know that's why I played it in the first place.
Hello everyone. My name is Silver Threads. There were several games that scared me as a kid. Even some games that weren't even meant to scare you. Turok 64 made me feel like dinosaurs were hunting me. Tomb Raider gave me the feeling of impending doom that I couldn't escape. Mostly because of the janky controls. Heck, even Clanker's Cavern in Banjo-Kazooie made me nervous to go in the water. But there was only one game that ever made me feel like I was actually in real danger, and I was too terrified to even play the game past a certain point. That game is Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Eternal Darkness is a third-person horror-themed action-adventure game released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002. It was developed by Silicon Knights and published and owned by Nintendo. The game takes heavy inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft, as well as other notable horror authors such as Edgar Allan Poe and Stephen King, for example. You play as Alexander Roivas, a student in Washington University who's suddenly called by a detective to identify a body at her grandfather's mansion. There's no evidence as to who or how her grandfather was killed, and it's up to her to solve the mystery. You travel through the mansion Resident Evil style, collecting keys, solving puzzles, looking at maps, and beating baddies. But what makes the game unique, and the reason my impressionable child mind thought I was in actual danger while playing this game, was its sanity system. While sanity meters have been done many times nowadays, back then it was rare. There was a sanity meter implemented in the game that slowly drained as you progressed through the mansion. If it got too low, you experienced hallucinations. These ranged from breaking the fourth wall, reciting Hamlet, backfiring spells, and, the part that made the game feel sentient, interface screws such as resetting the game, cranking down the volume, switching to another video input, or pretending to delete your save game when you go to save it. You could walk into a room to experience an event, only to have the game white out, bring you back to the entrance of the room, and realize none of it even happened. The effect this had on young Silver Threads was basically being scared of literally everything. I didn't know what would happen or when. The monsters terrified me because they influenced the meter, and the spooky atmospheric music really set the tone well for you are about to die feelings. It seemed like the game was aware of my presence and was actively trying to hurt me psychologically in any way it could, and I started to believe it could potentially hurt me physically as well. I turned the game off about a half hour to an hour in, and never played it again. Of course, I'm old enough now to know that it was just clever game mechanics. The interface screws are now just a little dated because it was based on the aesthetics of old tube TVs and not the HD TVs of today. But, despite that, this game left a permanent mark, and no other game has come even close to leaving that much of an impression on my life.
Hello there. Thank you for stopping by. My name is Seraphine, the Midnight Bard, and horror is my passion. There is a thrill associated with the horror genre in cinema. A good horror movie can take you to dark places and make you experience a complex cocktail of emotions, all in a short hour or so worth of runtime. There is never any danger for you as the events of the film unfold, but your heart is left racing all the same. That's the beauty of fiction, after all. You are allowed to experience all of the thrill and danger while remaining safely detached from all of the negative aspects of it all. Supermassive games sought to blur the lines between spectator and participant with their survival horror game, Until Dawn. And they did so by turning a time-honored horror movie tradition on its head. We've all left the theater after the conclusion of this season's scariest film and declared why the characters in the movie were foolish and how we would have done things differently in their place in order to make it out alive. Until Dawn says, "All right, let's see you put your money where your mouth is," and grants you complete freedom of choice over not just one, but 7 characters. The plot sees a group of friends meet up at an isolated cabin in the woods after a terrible tragedy for a weekend of fun and reconnecting. The shadow of past events hovers in the air, however, and a sense of dread can be felt from the very start. The atmosphere is dark and moody, making perfect use of the nighttime hours and the quiet setting of a mountain cabin. The night is just quiet enough to make one uneasy, and the stillness of the woods surrounding the cabin makes it all the scarier when you swear you saw something move in the darkness. Something did move in the dark, right? The story is a web of choices that have the potential to affect any one of the 7 playable characters in both positive and negative ways. And ultimately, that is the most terrifying thing of all. There is very little limit to what you can choose, but there is almost no way of knowing what consequences your choices might bring. The game will place characters in difficult and terrifying situations, giving vague threats as to what might be lurking just out of sight, and demand the player choose what course of action to take in just a few seconds' time. How would you react when something unknown snatches your boyfriend or girlfriend and runs into the woods while they scream for your help? How about when a deranged maniac reminiscent of the Jigsaw Killer hands you the choice of pulling a lever to decide who lives and dies out of 2 of your best friends? There are no right or wrong answers in Until Dawn, only choice. Perhaps the best thing about Until Dawn is the attention to detail. From the moment all of the friends arrive at the cabin, the player knows that something is not 100% right. There are secrets hiding behind the facades of friendship and celebration, and nearly every location is teeming with clues, hints, and even red herrings, giving the player enough information to know that all is not well, while not disclosing what it is that they should be afraid of. Wanted posters warn of escaped convicts. Legends tell of old mines somewhere in the mountainous landscape. There are whispers of an abandoned mental asylum where terrible experiments took place. And if you are vigilant, you may even catch a glimpse of the man in the clown mask watching you from the shadows. What is happening in these woods? Who can and can't be trusted? And how will your actions affect someone else's chances of seeing daylight? Spanning roughly 10 hours, Until Dawn is a game that will linger in your mind, leaving you with questions and wondering what actions, if any, are the right ones. The story pulls no punches, putting each character in both real and perceived danger, and giving you split seconds to decide on a course of action. Lastly, the game gives just enough information that an attentive player might solve the mystery of what really lurks in the woods, but gives credence to so many other shadows and specters that the player will question what is real and what is in their imagination until the harrowing conclusion. So, what do you think your chances are of surviving Until Dawn? I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Anastasia and the Scare Lab for allowing me to partake in this series. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope we meet again.
Well, I believe I'm old enough now to say things like back in my days. And if you don't mind, I will start my contribution to the question at hand with exactly that. So, back in my days, the most high-end personal computers had about 232 megahertz processing power max. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. But I actually feel old thinking about how long ago this was. Owning a PC wasn't too common, and I grew up mostly with the original NES and Game Boy. At least until we got our first PC as a hand-me-down from a relative. So, when I got asked which game scared me the most, I immediately had a plethora of games to choose from. After all, my own YouTube career started with me as an indie horror game Let's Player in, I believe it was 2013. My first thoughts were drawn to some of the games I played back then. But, nah, they had nothing on what my definitive answer is. And now I will throw all my credibility out the window by confessing to you that even though I really love playing horror games, I have never ever played a single Resident Evil or Silent Hill game. Like, at all. The genre of survival horror just never stuck with me. As I was sitting there at my desk, contemplating what my answer to the question would be, I suddenly realized that this aversion was not something that developed on accident. Okay, picture this. A wee lad of about 8 years, sitting at his very first personal computer, looking to play video games. A couple of games are already pre-installed. Games like the original Secret of Monkey Island, Commander Keen, etc. So it was either text adventures or side-scrolling action-adventure games like what he was used to on his NES. This little guy has basically no idea how to operate a computer in the first place, and has no idea how to control a game other than pressing the arrow keys or maybe the space bar and control keys on the keyboard. Now imagine this little fella stumbling upon a game that is unlike anything he ever knew. A game that was in actual 3D. He only sees English text, he understands diddly squat and just jumps in. The intro shows a car driving up to an old mansion, and this middle-aged, mustachioed gentleman steps out, walks up the driveway and steps into the main hall. The door slams shut behind him, and he continues to slowly walk upstairs. It's a very slow, ominous scene accompanied by eerie DOS music. The tension is high, and this little lad sits in front of his monitor, glued to the screen, fascinated by the three-dimensional shape of a human investigator entering the attic of the mansion. Something his young, naive eyes have never seen before. He gains control over the person. It's slow tank controls, as we call them now. The left and right arrow keys rotate the figure in the according direction, up and down equal moving forward and backward. The boy presses the spacebar, thinking it would equal jumping. Instead, his figure changes into a weird stance and back to idle when the spacebar was let go. The kid is confused and tries to figure out the controls by randomly pressing keys, but before he even got a chance to learn anything about the controls, the music suddenly changes. It is scary, fast, menacing. The boy immediately is on edge, knowing something was about to happen, and finally he sees something outside the window of the room his figure was in. He still has no clue what's going on when suddenly the window bursts and a hellish crossbreed between a dog and a chicken with giant teeth comes jumping in. In a sincere fear-induced panic, the boy frantically now presses every button, tries to somehow find a way to jump on the creature, which he thought was the way to go, but there is no jumping command. The boy would look for a weapon if he just could figure out how to access the inventory in the first place. Meanwhile, this dog chicken from hell jumps at him and attacks, drawing actual blood that splatters from the gentleman's body. Again, something his young naive eyes have never seen before. Finally, the kid finds the command window and navigates his way to the command Fight. He exits out of the menu and again tries every button, but again to no avail. Now a trapdoor opens, and a fully 3D rendered zombie gets lifted up into the room. Seeing a fully 3-dimensional zombie for the first time in his life, this wee lad panics even more. He is in flight mode. He wants to run away from the monsters in the game just like he actually wants to run away in real life right now. But the tank controls and the ever so slow movement of his character make it impossible to get away. His character gets stun-locked, with more and more blood being drawn from him. He is trapped, scared to death by the monsters that show no mercy, and he stares at the screen, watching his character getting brutally murdered. With a piercing scream, the gentleman falls down and dies. The screen turns black, and in the very next scene, the boy witnesses the dreadful, scary zombie dragging the lifeless corpse of his character into a cave of sorts for only God knows what reason. That wee lad never made it past the first room because after that, he actually never played the game ever again. He had nightmares for weeks on end, thinking about that one screen of the game that left him scarred, helpless, and traumatized. So, my first ever real horror game was my first ever 3D game as well, and it was the original 1992 release of Alone in the Dark on DOS of all things. The archetype of survival horror. The great granddaddy, the one that inspired Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The original survival horror. I mean, these graphics and music of course would never scare anyone today anymore, but back then, this was some serious stuff. And remember, we are talking about an 8-year-old boy whose heaviest exposure to any kind of violence or horror was actually the TV show Goosebumps, which is a whole different can of worms altogether. But this experience actually spoiled survival horror as a whole genre for me. I watched my friends play Silent Hill or Resident Evil on PlayStation when we got older, but I myself never touched any survival horror game ever again. This moment of sheer overwhelming horror and helplessness followed me for so many years that I still vividly remember that scene and the feeling I had back then. Funnily enough, in preparation for my part in this, I downloaded DOSBox and played my old nemesis again. I actually had a pretty good laugh now that I'm older and used to way more relentless and graphically impressive horror games. But to me, the question that was posed was pretty clear. And my answer could not be changed for anything but what I just told you. I actually still feel hints of that original dread I felt back then as a little boy when I start up the game today. Because no matter how far gaming technology came, no matter how impressive mechanics or graphics nowadays are, nothing I played since ever had an even remotely similar effect on me. That feeling of unreadiness, helplessness, and panic. This game, paired with me being just a young boy, that scared me for years. Way longer than I'm comfortable to admit. In short, that sequence that unfolded over less than 10 minutes still is burned into my subconsciousness. And it made me voluntarily, yet at that time unknowingly, miss out on a whole subgenre of horror games. And all this by using only the very first room. And to me, no other game could ever reproduce that.
So the game that freaked me out or creeped me out the most was Left 4 Dead, the original one that was released back in 2009. It's a first-person shooter survival horror game that is basically all about zombies and 4 people that you are trying to save. and supposedly one of them thinks that if you make it to the islands of the Florida Keys, you will be saved, or there's safety there and these zombies will leave you alone. So the reason why this game freaked me out so much back when I was playing it was just how well it was made. The zombies were really realistic. They had a lot of bosses. The music was great. You never knew what was going to happen. And basically, I had never really played a first-person shooter game ever. I'm one of those guys that I'm not really a big gamer at all. I stopped playing back with the PlayStation 2, Nintendo 64, even the original Nintendo. So this was a huge jump from playing Mario Brothers to trying to kill all these zombies. And the creepy parts were basically the music underneath. You'd be walking around trying to figure out where to go. You'd hear low music and all of a sudden there'd be like 50 zombies, or the horde as they called it, and you had to kill them all. And when you killed them, it was realistic. Their heads would explode, limbs would explode, they'd fall over, there'd be screaming, stuff like that. And when you're not used to that kind of stuff, you hear screaming and really creepy music underneath. It does creep you out a little bit, especially when you're playing at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And one of the first bosses is a boomer, which is this weird, fat, huge zombie that also had a really weird noise. And if you shot them, usually they exploded and bile would fly everywhere. So that was kind of gross. And they had another boss that basically he could jump on you from really, really long distances, and he'd tear at your face, and he'd do that until he was pushed off or he was killed, but you never knew where he was coming from, except for the music. You'd hear that underneath, and all of a sudden this thing would just pounce on you, and it would freak you out a little bit because you weren't expecting it. So I know there's a lot more games out there that are better, but this is one of the first ones that I played that actually did creep me out. I stopped playing it. My wife loved it, so she's played all of them now. She's actually working on the very last one that just came out, and it's just as creepy as it was when I first picked it up back then. So if you're ever looking for a good first-player shooter game that stands the test of time and is kind of weird, I'd go for Left 4 Dead, the original, just for the nostalgia of it all.
Emily wants to play. Just from the title, the game doesn't sound like much of a horror game. And perhaps, for avid horror game players, it may not seem all that bad. But once you put on a VR headset, it takes on a whole new world of excitement. So this is a game where you play a pizza delivery man on your last drop for the evening. Upon entering the house, the door behind you shuts and you're trapped inside from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. With little guidance from the start, you must figure out how to interact with each of these creepy dolls in order to survive the night. Now, my first time playing was in VR, and I was not prepared for what horror games were like through this medium. VR was still fairly young at that point, and I never owned a headset at the time, and despite me loving horror and horror video games, I'm terrible at them. I'll buy them, I'll play 5 minutes, like cool, poop my pants, and shut it down. Anyway, so how this game got me so good was I tried to play it off as it was nothing. So I walk into this house, and it's cool because you're able to pick up all the different stuff, turn on and off the lights, poke at the dolls, and I'm just messing around. I'm poking at the dolls, taunting them, flicking the lights on and off. I'm like, oh, Emily, what? You gonna turn the lights on and off on me? Nothing happens. Yet. Every hour in the game is a new level. And if you haven't figured out what to do by that time, the jump scare comes. I was not prepared for a jump scare in VR. Now, I'm playing this in a VR arcade, so there's lots of other people around. And I'm messing around, having fun, having a good laugh. And I go into this hall, and all of a sudden, she's right in front of you, screaming in your face. Now, as any brave man would do, I totally held my ground, stood up to her, and not at all screamed. What actually happened was I screamed loud enough for everyone in the building to hear me, curled up in a ball, and started laughing at the fact that I screamed that loud for everyone to hear me. My buddy who was there with me has not let me live that day down. Which is fair, because I haven't let me live that day down. Out of all the horror games I've played, that one holds a special place in my dirty underwear. I do recommend you try it out, especially in VR if you have the option. It's just fun, and it's fairly cheap these days. That's my game.
Hey guys, Creepy Face here. This is a really cool idea, thanks for having me. Okay, so I was asked what video game scared me. Now, when I play a horror video game, I want something that's going to actually scare me. Because a lot of horror games out there are just mainly jump scares. And like, while it is scary, that feeling of horror is over just as suddenly as the jump scare. Now, when it comes to psychological horror, there's a game called Soma that I particularly enjoyed thoroughly. Just to kind of give you a taste as to what is going on in Soma. In the game, it kind of shows you a little bit of a flashback of you being in a car accident with your girlfriend, and your girlfriend dies. You wake up to a phone call in your apartment, and it's a doctor telling you that you have a brain scan, and to drink some red tracer fluid, which I would not do, but in the game you have to, apparently. So you drink the fluid, you go to the appointment, and the doctor's office is like the back rooms. Like it's just an empty, vacant area, and you have to find the damn password to even get to the appointment. So, anyway, you get to the guy, he tells you to put the device on, and you get a brain scan. After a couple of static noises, and you going, what the hell's going on, you take the device off, and you're not in the back rooms anymore. You're not in the office anymore. You're, like, in fucking space. But come to find out, it's actually an underwater facility, like, subterranean. And I've read enough H.P. Lovecraft to know that that's never good. The use of ambience, sound, and environment alone are enough to drive you crazy. So when this happens, you, like, hear evil creatures, like, screaming in the background and just, like, loud noises banging around. And you gotta figure out how to escape this room by yourself. Later on, you come to find out that something happened in this facility, and you have something to do with it. Somehow. You have basically been transported, in a sense, to this facility, for whatever reason. And that's for you to find out. And there are robots that you encounter who are either, like, dying or still able to talk, and you'll quickly find out that they think that they are human. And you also come to find out that they're the scientists that once worked there. So you're like, what the hell? And as you would expect, of course, there are creatures that chase you. And the creatures are also under the same category as the robots that you find. They have their humanity still, but they're so taken over by machines and whatever else thing has screwed with them that there's no point in even trying to talk to them. They're going to kill you. They're absolutely unsettling. The tone of their voice is sporadic, it's disfigured, and you can hear them from like 2 hallways away while you're just crouching. Did I mention that it's a first-person game and you don't get any weapons? Yeah. There is no attack. There is only run and hide. It's a very bizarre game. I highly recommend it to anyone who likes to play games and kind of think about the plot, because this one will definitely keep you up at night. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, if you've ever played Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Frictional Games, I believe, yeah, they're the ones who made this game. This game has a complete sense of dread throughout the entire game. The plot itself is a masterpiece. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, I just recommend that you get this game and play it. Definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. And trust me when I say this, take your time when you play this game, and you'll find everything in the game pieces itself together in its own weird, twisted masterpiece. It's a very mysterious game. I don't want to be too into detail with a lot because I get excited about video game plots, and this game is definitely something I would talk about for a while. Because the game makes you think about your humanity. When I played this game for PlayStation 4 in 2016, I believe, it was perfect. Like, there was no issues with the game. I didn't want to put the controller down. It was awesome. Definitely recommend it. Anyway, thank you Scare Lab for having me on here. This was super cool. And thanks everybody for hanging out. I hope you all have a good day or night.
The reason 242 is afraid of Resident Evil 2. Written and narrated by 242. In January 1998, Resident Evil 2, made by Capcom, came to the PlayStation. It had 2 discs, one for each playable character. It's a survival horror game, single player. You view the world third person through cameras. You can play as either Leon S. Candy or Claire Redfield. It's Leon's first day as a cop in Raccoon City, while Claire is a college student looking for her brother, Chris Redfield, who is also a cop. The first disc is Leon's story, and the second is Claire's. The game takes place September 29, 1998, 2 months after the first Resident Evil game. Raccoon City's residents have been turned into zombies by the T-Virus, a biological weapon made by the Umbrella Corp. Leon and Claire must make their way to the police station, finding out that most of the police force have been killed or turned. You go through the game killing zombies and other Umbrella-made monsters. There are puzzles to solve and much to explore as you try to find your way out of Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 was originally made to be a 1.5 of Resident Evil 1, but was cancelled when it was about 2/3 of the way done. It was going to be a much different game than what we got. Resident Evil 2 was well received and was acclaimed for its atmosphere, setting, graphics, audio, scenarios, and overall gameplay. It was an improvement over the original game. It sold 5.77 million copies on the PlayStation alone. It has been ported to many other platforms and even has a remake made in 2019, over 20 years later. Now, I have told you about the game, its history, and how it did in its time and even today. Let me tell you why the game scares me. In January 1998, I was 11 years old. My sister was 19 at the time, and she's the one that rented the game. I had seen someone else play Resident Evil 1 and it didn't look that scary. My sister even told me that each disc was a different character. I know I end up playing both characters and I don't know which one I was playing for at the start, but I was playing Leon when I got to the police station. Small side note, Leon's story was the easier one and Claire's was the harder one. I didn't even remember the story all that much until I watched someone play the remake on YouTube. I remember exploring Raccoon City to see what was going on. I kept dying by the hordes of zombies. The one death that I recall the most clearly is being at a bar. The zombies break in and swarm you. I died before I could even realize how much I had messed up. Somehow, I got to the police station, and it was so empty. I recall the feeling of dread. It was dark, and I knew those zombies were just outside, waiting to get in and kill me yet again. I remember playing for a while before I came across what I called a licker. It was an enemy on all fours with a very long tongue. It killed me like I was nothing. I remember how odd it looked and moved. It crawled around like an animal, even though it looked like it was once human. It was the last thing I played. I wasn't able to take any more. For years, I swore that there was a zombie under my bed, going to grab me and drag me into the darkness. I would jump into the bed and hide under the covers till I fell asleep. So let's get a few things straight. At 11 years old, my favorite games were Spyro and Final Fantasy VII. So I never played a game that was as unforgiving as this one, and at the same time though, I was watching Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, so the horror was already showing itself. I have played scary games like Phasmophobia, read some messed up and scary stories, and watched many horror shows. But nothing has ever got me as scared as that 11-year-old who looked under her bed for zombies. I don't even like bars that much. Who knows if a horde is just about to break in any moment.
Hello there. Thank you for stopping by. My name is Seraphine, the Midnight Bard, and I've seen many things in my travels that would make the blood of the most hardened soul run cold. With that said, it's no wonder that I would find a brightly colored adventure across a world of magic and wonder a refreshing change of pace. But one of these adventures held a chilling surprise for a young midnight bard, one that still lingers in his nightmares to this day. The year was 1998, and the world is in a frenzy about little creatures known as Pokemon. The game centers around the 10-year-old protagonist traveling across the world collecting these adorable creatures, battling against other trainers, and collecting badges from bosses known as gym leaders in a quest to become the best trainer in the world, a Pokemon Master. The number of these lovable companions increases by roughly 100 with each new generation, and the Pokemon world itself grows more and more vast, adding a myriad of different locations that range from bright cities filled with adventures to small cozy towns and more fantastical ones such as forests and temples and worlds that are seemingly pulled from the pages of fairy tales. But Bard, I hear you say, what could possibly be so terrifying about a world so full of wonder and mystery? The truth of the matter is that, despite their shimmering facade, fairy tale worlds are often home to the darkest of shadows. And in the Pokemon world, there is a place that is a masterclass in horror by contrast. In the Kanto region of the Pokemon world, there is a place that stands out in stark comparison to the rest of the continent. An adventuring trainer would be roughly midway through their journey across the land, and would by now have grown accustomed to the bright and cheerful locales that the Kanto region is composed of. And that's what would make their next stop so chilling. Upon exiting the rock tunnel, the darkest cave in the Kanto region, the trainer would expect to be met with the cheerful music of a new town, melodies that by this point have been associated with rest havens and safe places. But rather than the familiar feeling of relief, the trainer would be met with something that seems completely alien to the world of Pokemon. The atmosphere feels restless. The music is anxious, haunting, and sad. The world itself seems to be grieving, and the player has just been introduced to Lavender Town. Despite the limited capacity of the Game Boy system, the Pokemon team managed to create a place that stuck with players for decades after their first visit. A simple Google search of Lavender Town will produce a series of blog posts, blurbs and videos of people detailing their first visit to the bizarre place. The dejected atmosphere was such a sharp subversion of what players had experienced up to this point in the game that it generated a feeling of discomfort so heavy that it is unforgettable. The music that plays in Lavender Town alone has been the subject of many internet creepypasta, including the rumored Lavender Town Syndrome, which said that some 200 children who heard the Lavender Town theme became depressed and were driven to suicide. Others were allegedly stricken with physical maladies including headaches, anxiety, and nosebleeds, though all of these reports turned out to be fictional. More than just the somber mood that the place itself invokes, the story that unfolds in Lavender Town is one that feels more at home in a story told around a campfire than in the world of Pokemon. A chat with any passing NPC would not yield the usual merry insight into the life of a person living in a world of wonder. Instead, these townfolk would be weeping openly, expressing sorrow, and even ask the player if they believe in the existence of ghosts. What happened here? The player might ask themselves as they move through the town, all while the haunting melody that is this town's theme continues to play in the background, resonating, magnifying, and giving life to the palpable sorrow of the town. After a short exploration, the player would eventually look to the edge of the town where they'd find the Pokemon Tower, like an exclamation point commanding attention. If the atmosphere entering the town feels mildly oppressive, then one step into the Lavender Town Pokemon Tower feels openly aggressive. The music is like the haunted chorus of the departed, loudly declaring their regret. Tombstones dot the landscape of each floor, each representing a dearly departed Pokemon companion. "I came to pray for my Clefairy," says a man standing near the entrance to the tower. "I can't stop crying." "My Growlithe," says another. "Why did you die?" Just before you move up to the next floor, there is a woman who declares, "I am a channeler. There are spirits up to mischief." And it doesn't take long to see that her words ring true. Channelers possessed by some unseen force are present in every floor beyond the first. Some growl ravenously at the player like wild animals. Some laugh maniacally, and others curse the player upon sight. The atmosphere in the Pokemon Tower makes you feel unwelcome. The channelers, the graves, and the music all combine to give a sense that you're not alone, that something knows you're here, and that it isn't happy that you are. And soon enough, you see it with your own eyes. The screen flashes with the typical patterns that indicate a wild Pokemon encounter. By this point in the game, the player would have seen hundreds of wild Pokemon, but something's different this time. Instead of finding themselves face to face with a Pokemon, the player stands across from a large humanoid blur of a shape. Eyes and a mouth are visible in the head region of the mostly amorphous form. "Get out! Get out!" it says. The player calls upon one of his trusted companions to do battle with the entity, but none of them respond to any commands, as they are too terrified of the shape that stands before them. Attempts to capture the figure prove fruitless, and soon enough, the player finds that the only viable option is escape. The player soon leaves Lavender Town, as the ghost of the tower will not let you proceed beyond a certain point. Though the plot will eventually lead the player back to solve the mystery of the spirit, but this event leaves a different type of scar upon the player. The player, after acquiring an item called the Sylph Scope that allows them to level the playing field with the ghost, comes to find that it is the spirit of a departed Pokemon that was killed by the villainous Team Rocket. The spirit, a Marowak, is the mother to a cub that was left orphaned after her passing, and, unable to move on, she clung to the mortal world out of fear of what would become of her cub. A resolution is eventually found. The orphaned cub, a Cubone, is either adopted by a kindly old man or finds a home with the player depending on the generation of the game. But, despite a seemingly happy ending, the player is often left changed. Somehow, the Pokemon world seems a little less innocent after the events of Lavender Town. Despite the game's bright, anime aesthetic, charming creatures and memorable characters, the Pokemon world is not free of cruelty, sorrow, or death. Moreover, despite having come face to face with a literal ghost that was capable of possessing several humans and forcing them to attack the player, the truth remains that it was just a victim of people and their greed. I believe that it was Neil Gaiman who once said that fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. I would like to add to that by saying, fairy tales tell us that monsters exist, and often remind us that just like us, monsters can feel love and loss as well. I would like to thank Dr. Anastasia and the Scare Lab for inviting me to participate in this series. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope we meet again.
Thank you to all of the collaborators for sharing their stories today. You can find all of their channels in the description below. Please show them your support, as they were kind enough to agree to this collaboration and take the time out of their busy schedules to dive into their memories for us. As for what games scared me the most, well, I have covered some of them on this channel so far. The Seventh Guest and Ducky Ducky Literature Club come to mind as having a huge psychological impact on me in childhood and adulthood respectively. There are, of course, other games that have scared me, but you'll have to wait for future videos to find out. Thank you for joining me in the Scare Lab today. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, share with your friends, and if you would like to see me being scared out of my wits in real time, please see my Twitch channel in the description below. I hope to see you for the next experiment. Take care and be safe out there.